Good afternoon and welcome to the Oxford Biodynamics Interim Results webinar hosted by Yellowstone Advisory. We're delighted to have with us Jon Burrows, the CEO, and Matthew Wakefield, the new chairman. I'd now like to hand over to Matthew to start the presentation.
Thanks, Alex, very much. And thanks, everyone, for once again listening in. We do appreciate the time you spend with us. I'd like to start off just very briefly, I will be very brief, on recapping what we outlined at the last webinar, which we did in January, just after the finals. And there we said that our aim was to get our main commercial product, the checkpoint inhibitor response test, out on the market by the end of February. And we also alluded to the fact that we had a proposal out with a major pharmaceutical company, which went out before December, and we were working on translating that into revenue. We got the cert test out end of February. We started getting our first orders in March. And we also finally signed the MSA with well, it is one of the leading global pharmaceutical companies in June. Obviously, if you look at initial cert orders, it's small, but we feel we've started, and you have to start somewhere. If you look at what our prize is, the prize is to get a substantial percentage of the available market. At the moment, the run rate on cert tests, it represents 0.1%. That's 0.1% of the market. So as I say, we know what our prize is. We know this test will be successful. We're totally committed to it. And I want to hand over to Jon to actually give further detail on how the company is going about achieving that prize.
Thank you, Matthew. Can you see the slides?
Slides up, Jon, yes.
Excellent, thank you. So here's the title. I'm going to go through the disclaimer very quickly. Thanks to everybody for attending. I know we've got a lot of attendees, so good afternoon to most of you that are in the UK time zone, and hello to those of you that are in the US time zone. I'm very excited actually to tell you about our progress since we launched the cert test in 2022. And I want to spend about a half an hour going through the slides and then really get into the questions that you all have. We're at a very, very good place for the company. And I think it's going to be very good to get your feedback in the questions and answer what it is that you really want to know. So with that, our primary focus, as we keep saying, for 2022 is cert. So when we talked in January, we told you how we had built the fundamentals for the company in 2021 to look at clinical testing, pharmaceutical development, and not to jettison the R&D. And we're still doing that. We still have the Explorer kit for our academics and our R&D colleagues. We're still vigorously working on our pipeline of other products to come in behind cert. But we feel it's very, very important for 22 to focus on the checkpoint inhibitor response test, to build that revenue engine, to get that first product that defines the company and drives us into the market as a British biotech in both the US, the UK, the European markets that can successfully deploy and sell a very important test, and then follow that with others. And just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, often what I will do is refer to something called ICIs, or immune checkpoint inhibitors. They're the same as checkpoint inhibitors. So those two terms are being used interchangeably. Our test is obviously called the checkpoint inhibitor response test, but it's for the use of ICIs. And so we launched the test in February of 22. And this graphic that I'm showing here, really, this graphic has been like catnip to everybody we've talked to, especially at ASCO. We have it on the back of our business card. And there's really only three parts to it. The first part, which is up here in the top left, really opens the conversation when we meet people, where we say, doctor, do you know which patients will respond to checkpoint inhibitors? And obviously they say, no, we don't. There is no way to do that. And then we show them the data on the side here, and we say, well, we've developed a predictive test from blood that if you use this before treatment, looking at this Kaplan-Meier curve here, we can accurately tell you who will respond and who will not respond. And the universal response we get to this is, wow, look at the separation between those two curves. You really can tell very quickly who's going to respond, who isn't. You could drive a bus through that curve. And this gets us into the conversation with clinicians, researchers, hospitalists, etc., where they'll sit with us for 10, 15 minutes to just hear what this is all about. And then the third part of this is obviously the QR code, which sends them straight to our digital marketing collateral, to the page that will allow them to either order the test or find out more about it, or contact our customer service and our clinical support team to understand how they could use this and put this into their clinical practice. So what are we really trying to do? On this slide, we're trying to get the market's attention and traction. Oncologists, physicians in general, are very conservative. And the reason for that is because they've sworn to do no harm. And they're looking at ways of helping their patients, but new things that come in, they really need to be vetted. And actually, we've been very encouraged by the early uptake and the attention that we have got, but we still need to convert that. So our sales team is actually in what we call grind mode. We are building the foundation for peer-to-peer sales with the early adopters to establish the value proposition of our test for all oncologists. And what does that mean? That means that those oncologists that see this test and are willing to bring it into their practice with their patients in oncology are actually the people who the other oncologists will look to and say, well, they're using it successfully, we should start using it. And if you look at these numbers, we've had 42 tests since we launched in February. And you look at those numbers and you could say, well, wow, is that all? But I can tell you from my experience at working with Ventana Roche, where we launched 20 tests every year. And when I worked at my last company, Oncoplex, where we launched 6 LDTs, I was actually very, very encouraged with this, because you can go the first 90 days without getting anybody ordering your test. So the fact that we're getting attention is very, very good. Now you can see it's kind of the doldrums, right? 6, 16, 5, 15 so far in June. But this is the beginning of going through the grind. And what we're targeting is 50 oncology groups. Now there are 6,000 oncologists in the US, and most of them are not going to use this test until they see it test driven by others. We have about 250 doctors on a list in 50 US oncology groups that we're approaching, we're talking to. And what we're trying to do is get at least one doctor in each of those groups to use our test. Now, so far, we're following these metrics of the numbers of doctors ordering, the number of group practices ordering, and then the number of group practices with more than one doctor ordering. And that's really quite important. And let me go through this. So right now, all of these tests are coming from 6 doctors. Actually, I heard this morning, 7 doctors in 6 group practices. So we have converted 6, and we're continuing to move. What was really good, this was actually starting to happen, you can see in May, is when we went in the beginning of June to ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncologists meeting in Chicago. We had a very high interest from oncologists and hospital groups. And what we need to do now is convert this interest into expanded sales, expanded attention and traction, and really drive these clinical sales channels and distribution channels. And you could say, Jon, what are you talking about? Well, obviously, the oncologist ordering the test in an oncology group daily when they're seeing their patients is a sales channel. And when you talk to hospital groups that are populated by oncologists, and some of these hospital groups have 5 hospitals in an area, some have 50 around the country. When you start getting to talk to people like that as early as we are, in my experience, we usually haven't been able to speak to hospital groups about things for 6 months or more after a launch, because they're watching what's going on. When you get to talk to these hospital groups, and we talked to 3 of them at ASCO, what you're able to do is to start the conversation and try and get the oncologists in those groups using your test. When you start to do that, it will be a small number, and then it will start to move through the hospital system. And that is what I call a distribution channel, because you don't just have sales happening in one place, you have them distributed across the whole of the health system. That's another thing which we're pushing on and trying to bring to fruition. So now that we have this level of success this early in after the launch, we feel that we've learned how to sell this directly to oncologists so that they can get the word out peer-to-peer. And we need to duplicate our sales team's successful approach. And let me tell you what that sales team approach looks like. We have a lead salesperson who has a good network and is able to drive market access and sales with that network of early adopters. And they are backed up by our customer service and our clinical support group. That's very important, because as soon as a doctor decides they want to go to our website, they immediately need information that our customer service group and our clinical support group has. Now, who's in the customer service group? People that I've worked with in my past life and past companies that I trust, I've brought into the company, Ellen and Leanne, and they're very, very good at what they do. In our clinical support group, who's in that group? That group is my VP of clinic, Heather Jordan, who again, I've worked with over the last 10 years. She's very good at what she does. She understands how to do this. And then Dr. Robert Heaton, who is our medical director, and as a company that's selling a medical product, we have to have a medical director who is available for all of these doctors to talk to doctor on doctor about how it works, what their concerns are, etc. This is a very powerful way to engage the doctors and get them to start ordering. And now that we know that that triangle works and what the narrative has to be, we need to duplicate that to form 2, 3, 4 more triangles going forward. So that's the oncologist. What we're also trying to do, and I think it's working very well too, is to get the market's attention and traction in terms of the big pharma. And why? Because big pharma are developing these drugs, and when they get registered on the market, they're obviously selling them and building the markets. They're also going through what's called life cycle. And that means even though they put on their first which we call their first generation drug. They're always looking to build the second or third generation drug that will take the place of the first generation and keep the market running for them. The market in the US for checkpoint inhibitors is $20 billion. They're selling a lot of drugs to a lot of doctors and patients. However, they know that there's a 70% failure rate, or at least a 70% non-response rate in the patients that are getting them. And the payers who are paying $200,000 a year or more for these treatments that aren't very effective are starting to look at this and say, you've got to do better. You've got to try and find the patients that will respond. You can't just keep doing this. Our test gives them a way to actually go at doing that. And people will say, well, wait a minute, pharma's not going to like that because you're now limiting their market. But what we fail to understand is that actually pharma have all the other things in their pipeline that these patients are going to be switched to. So even if someone isn't giving a checkpoint inhibitor, they're just moving into another chemo or targeted therapy, etc., for their treatment. So with our conversations with Big Pharma, as Matthew said, we started with some proposals out in December, and the contracting cycle for these can be actually quite long. It all depends on the pharma itself. And remember that these contracts are fee for service. What we are doing is we are talking to the pharma and we're saying, you have patient samples from your clinical developments that you need to understand the status of your ICI in. For this amount, this is the fee, we will run those. And if you do volume, we'll give you a break on that. And they have come back and said, we like that idea. It's going to help us. It's going to also help us determine how we do better clinical trials going forward, how we integrate the biomarker that this test actually represents into the way we think about developing the next generation drug. Those are the sorts of conversations we're having. When we presented data at ASCO, we had 4 pharma that had committed to meet with us and 2 or 3 others that said, well, we'll try and find a time. By the time we left, we had very positive meetings with 11 pharma. And what was absolutely astounding to me is that the master service agreement with detailed pricing for high volume cert testing and some of the translational work I just talked about on numerous projects with one big pharma actually got signed during ASCO. Now, this is the MSA for which there are multiple contracts on the horizon, and I expect the first one to come through very soon. I can't tell you exactly when, because these big pharma have their own internal workings. They have many stakeholders. And as you know, the economic situation that we all find ourselves in right now has people continually gut checking, going back, making sure that's really what they want to do and they're really going to spend the money, etc. These contracts are very, very close to coming to fruition and will help us very much going forward in the next several months. We also have multiple agreements with 5 other pharma that were solidified from those meetings in ASCO. Now, these are actually statements of work that, because these pharma, it's the first time they're really looking at working with us, they're looking to what's going on with the pharma that signed the MSA, what's going on with the clinicians who are using it, and they're also looking at putting a budget along with an SOW and moving on to start testing and trying out what we're doing. These types of contracts can yield, in the discussions we're having, 200, 500, 800 samples. That's why we're calling them high volume pricing contracts. On this next slide, I want to tell you about the fact that we have made CERT available in the UK as of the 21st of June. And we did this because we've been working over the last few months behind the scenes to put a pathway in place so that samples could be securely accepted and processed, and then the data given back to the ordering physician in the UK. We believe as a UK company, even though we are conquering the US market, that it's very important to mobilize in the UK to make the tests available in the UK. And they're available now to private practitioners. We've had some very good initial meetings with them. You can read some of the quotes that I've included here and that were included in the RNS on June 21st. We're also engaging with the NHS. As you know, this can take some time. There's a lot of stakeholders there as well, and we have to be passing the sniff tests, etc. But the other thing is, if you look at Dr. Simon Lord and Dr. Jeff Higgins, who I've quoted here, they both work for the NHS and they both work in private practice as well. And by giving the doctors in the UK that have dual roles like this access to the test, that can only help our case with getting the NHS to take a look and figure out how they want to interact with us. The other thing I will say here is that we are accepting these samples in the UK. We are shipping them anonymously, so we don't know who it is and any of the medical data, to the US, processing them. The data from the processing goes into the cloud, back to the UK. A report is then generated and sent back to the UK doctor. And only the UK doctor knows who that patient is and what's going on there. This is actually something which other large diagnostic companies in the US, like Foundation Medicine, Exact Sciences, Guardant Health, and Caris Life Sciences have been doing for many, many years. And it's a very accepted practice. What was very interesting to me as soon as we launched this in the UK was the first call that we had to the UK hotline was a doctor, and she asked, can I use this in pancreatic cancer? And that led to a conversation with our medical director and to a lot of information that that doctor could have from some of the samples that we used in our validation and our building of this test that were actually in pancreatic cancer. And what's interesting here is pancreatic cancer is not one of the 15 indications that these drugs have been registered for, but using it in pancreatic cancer is an off-label use, which under the recognizance of the physician can occur. So I want to move on and tell you also that this is not everything that's going on. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. And as I said at the beginning, we haven't jettisoned product development. We haven't stopped working on our Explorer kits and the other aspects of our business, but we're really focusing on the checkpoint inhibitor response test. And to focus on it, all of these things that I'm showing you here, along with the collateral that's on the left-hand side, and this is the sort of thing that you will see when you go to our digital site. All these things are being focused on. So we've talked about the customer service and clinical support aspect and how important that is in talking with doctors and getting them to order and having that helpline and the consultation from the medical director. But we also have been working very hard on reimbursement, because even if you can have the test ordered and sold, you have to still get paid for it. And doctors in the US will ask us two things fundamentally when we first start to talk to them. One is, where are your proof sources? How do I know this is any good? How have you validated it? Have you published on it? Have any of my peers used it? What are their opinions? Show me your collateral. And that's why when you hit the QR code, all of that is available to the clinician. The second thing that they're going to ask you is, who pays for it? How does it get paid for? And that's when you need to be able to tell them there is a CPT code that you can bill against within the insurance environment in the US, and your patient isn't going to have to pay for it out of pocket, and you're not going to get left with some sort of bill that you have to deal with. We've started out, as we told you before, using a miscellaneous code for molecular testing. And you can use that for many months and for a certain dollar value. What we've been chasing is a unique descriptor and code. And we have achieved that by the 1st of July, which is right around the corner. We will have, through the PLA committees for the payers, a unique descriptor and code assigned to us. And that descriptor basically says what's up on the screen here, that this test is for oncology, pan-tumor, that means any tumor. It's the genetic profiling using 8 DNA regulatory markers, those are ARAPI switch markers, by quantitative PCR. qPCR is a commoditized method in the industry. Everybody understands it and can do it. From whole blood, so it's non-invasive, it's a blood test, liquid biopsy, if you will, reported as a high or low probability of responding to immune checkpoint inhibitor therapy. And that's very important because the gravitas behind having that unique descriptor shows that the payers accept that this has value, that they're assigning a code to it. They're assigning a value to it that actually goes beyond what the miscellaneous code's value was. That will publish on October the 1st. So it's being granted July 1. It will publish in the tables of CPT codes that can be used by clinicians October 1. And we should start to see them, when they order the test, charging against this for reimbursement, which actually comes to us. So, because we run the test. So that's a very positive thing moving forward. And it gives us another level of purchase in the industry. It makes people realize how legitimate our test is, how legitimate we are. And it starts to allow us, as I talked to you about the hospital groups a little bit earlier, to start going after coverage determinations in all of the different geographies that these oncology groups and hospitals are, which further drives our ability to sell the test to the oncology community. The third bullet point here talks about having a presence at major meetings. And you can see we were overwhelmed at ASCO. We want to keep that going. There are 4 more meetings coming up this year. The next one is in September. It's in Paris. It's ESMO, as you can see on here. That's the European Society of Molecular Oncology. Interestingly, 45% of the attendees are actually US oncologists, and they go there to talk with their European and UK counterparts. They want to know what's going on in Europe, what innovations and what type of treatments are coming through there. This is a great opportunity for us. We're going to have our first booth. We're going to have a co-sponsored abstract with a big pharma that we will present at that meeting. And as soon as all of that has come out of embargo, we will be putting an RNS out about it. This meeting is from the 9th to the 13th of September, right after summer, and will build our momentum going through the end of the year in terms of business development and the conversations that we can continue to have with clinicians and pharma executives. The other thing that we're working on is bullet 4. Again, behind the scenes, this is product lifecycle support for CERT. So you may say, well, you've built CERT, it's built, just go sell it. Yeah, absolutely, that is what we're doing. But every product has a life cycle and it needs to continually be maintained. And I can explain how this works, I think, by telling you, really, this life cycle support comes from us listening to the clinicians, the oncologists we talk to the clinical developers in the pharma companies that we talk to. And the reason why I've got these 3 bullet points, breast cancer, bladder cancer, and super progressors, is because we've had a lot of breast cancer doctors say to us, OBD, there's this subset of patients in breast cancer called triple negative that don't respond to progesterone and estrogen treatments. They don't respond to HER2 treatments. They are triple negative, and we don't know if checkpoint inhibitors will help them or not, and we don't really use them there because we don't know. Now you have a test that can tell us up front from blood if somebody would respond. Can you tell us, do you have any experience of triple negative cases in the 800 samples you looked at and the 230 samples that you validated in? What does that look like? And this is the sort of thing that helps us to support the use and growth of CERT into the market. Similar thing with urologists. Most people think that urologists are just men doctors, or doctors for men, sorry, who take care of their prostate, etc. But that's not true. Urologists actually are very involved in bladder cancer for everybody. And the situation in bladder cancer is very similar to breast, where the doctors don't understand whether checkpoint inhibitors would work or not. There's not been a lot of work done. And so what we've heard is, well, we could use this test, right, to check our bladder cancer patients and see if they would benefit from a checkpoint inhibitor. And that's very important because a lot of the time, bladder cancer comes to a doctor and there's no muscle invasion yet. But then they work on it and eventually there's muscle invasion. And once you get there, you're in the later stages and it can be dire. So they'd like to know as early as possible what they can do, and can they find responders where these checkpoint inhibitors will really make a difference. And then the third part here on super progressors is there is a subset of cancer patients that if you give them a checkpoint inhibitor, because you know what it does is it takes the brake off of the T cells in the immune system so that they can now go and kill cancer and grow exponentially in your system to do it. There is a subset of patients that if you do that, you will actually exacerbate their disease. And those are the people who are at the very top of these curves in this red line that go all the way down very quickly. And what we're finding is that there's a link with what we're doing with being able to see response and non-response, and the speed at which the non-response actually happens and maybe even takes people to a place they don't want to be. So we're working on that as well, and that's very compelling for a lot of the clinicians. And then the digital marketing, well, you can see for yourself, I've explained a little bit of that, but, walking around ASCO with a whole armful of pamphlets and things to hand out to people just doesn't work these days. Having a booth with all these things for people to pick up. What you need is what we have, a postcard like what you see on the screen here, a business card with data on it, and a QR code that takes people straight to that collateral. And that's what we continue to build. And then in terms of health economics, and this is not trivial, even though it's at the bottom of the list here, with there being so much money spent on checkpoint inhibitors and 70% of the patients that won't respond, that will end up having an expensive treatment that may give them a toxicity that causes even more expenditure. What we need to be able to do is to make the case formally and analyze that data. And so as we go and have more and more usage, we will be commissioning health economics analyses by third-party independents so that we can actually show what the impact of this type of testing is on the oncology market and the checkpoint inhibitor market in general. So there's a look at the behind the scenes. Let me go to the summary slide so that we have some time. Whoops, excuse me. Let's go, whoa, going in the wrong direction. What a nice pause. Okay, right. So let's, I apologize, but I'm trying to move my window. There we go. Okay, so let me just summarize. Everything that you actually need to know about checkpoint inhibitor response test is in that blue graphic. And I think that that's a fantastic piece of work that our marketing department, led by Dave Bloom, who again is someone I've worked with before. I have massive confidence in him. I have massive confidence in the fact that we've brought together this product development and commercial team in the US that has really dovetailed so well with the R&D team in the UK to actually form a company that can work on both sides of the ocean to mobilize the test that we're focusing on up here, the checkpoint inhibitor response test. It's highly relevant. The doctors and pharma know it's highly relevant. There's a clear medical need. As I've explained, we're in grind mode and there are great things on the horizon. I've done this over the last 25 years in many different companies. I've mentioned some of them. I've seen that what you need to do is literally that. Do it. Get out on the street, talk to the clinicians, convert them, talk to the pharma people, get the contracts. And you just have to keep doing it. You get your first test, your 42nd test, your 100th test, your 1000th test. That's how it works. That's the grind mode. You get your first multi-million-dollar contract, you get your second one, your third one. And I will point out that that clear medical need in the pharma industry, when people see that another pharma is successfully using that test and potentially getting an edge on them, they come to see how they can use it and get that edge for themselves. So the oncologists are paying attention and being converted. We have 6 pharma at the table. We know the contracting cycle can be many months, but if you don't start, it never ends. So you just keep going. And we have now 6 pharma in the funnel, and the first high volume contracts from the MSA that we signed at the beginning of June are on the horizon, and that's good news for the company. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Alex.
John, Matthew, thank you very much for that. Sounds like it's a very exciting time at the company, and that all the focus is on the cert, and indeed quite a lot of the questions that we've had in are on the cert. And just as a reminder, if you do want to ask a question, please type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and deal with as many questions as we can. So I'm going to start here. We've had a few come in ahead of time, but I've got one that's come in during the presentation. Can you say or announce the name of the global pharma that has signed the MSA? And will you be able to announce those names in any future deals? It might lend weight to the positive news.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are contractually obligated at this point, until there's a signed agreement, not to divulge who that is. But we will be putting an RNS out as soon as we have the signed contract, and we will be telling you who that big pharma is. And we will be doing the same with the other 5 and the 5 that come beyond them as well. Okay,
great. Thanks, John. Can you just expand a little bit on the next steps? What are the follow-ups to the companies that you saw at ASCO? And what is the sales sort of cycle like for these products? How long is it between showing an interest and placing an order?
Yeah, so, back in my Ventana days when I was, the head of BD there, and we were working with the top 20 pharma, one of the things that we used to always comment about is that they're all different. It's like going and talking to a completely different entity in each one. They all have their different ways. So although there are commonalities, and that's still true today, and what we're seeing is that some companies, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, they want to have a bona fide master service agreement with a pricing structure baked in, and all the bells and whistles sorted, that they can then hang projects off to move forward. And that can take quite a while. And as you can imagine, once the people who you first engage with, the pharma execs and clinical development folks, who are mostly scientists who have moved, and medics that have moved into the basically running and administering these programs, once they see it and they get that it can help them, they want it, then they bring it in-house, and it goes through a lot of iterations with the people that they report to, the people who are building the actual strategy for all of the pipeline, how it fits, will it speed up or slow down the programs that are going on. Then you get procurement involved, and procurement don't understand any of that. All they're interested in is, are we getting the best price? Is this actually something that we need? Is it budgeted for? All those sorts of things. And we have no control over any of that. What we do have control over is continually talking with them and asking where they are, providing them the information, which, believe it or not, you can provide them the same information to 5 different people 5 different times, and then be asked for it again. In one situation, we had a procurement questionnaire, which we got sent 3 different times from 3 different people, and you just have to really stay on it. So that's how it works in some situations. Then there are other situations where the people who have engaged with you look and they know what they would use this for, and they can build a statement of work very quickly with you over a few weeks, and then start sending that up the flagpole, as it were, and without there having to be an MSA, get the budget. Now, remember that a lot of people went through their budget cycles at the end of last year, and now they're looking at something else they want to do. So they're all looking at this, and they're all going after this. But in a nutshell, basically, you don't know. You can only facilitate and do the part that you do well, and not hold them up, and just keep moving along. And the other thing you do is you cultivate who we call the influencers and champions within the company. And you keep them updated on, look, this doctor just used it for this type of patient, and your drug addresses that type of patient. You keep addressing them on and up to date on all those things. You keep that momentum and pressure moving forward so that it will come through. And I'm very bullish on the fact that off this MSA, we have several contracts that are very, very close to final, and you should be seeing them very soon.
That neatly sort of comes into the next question, John, which is, are there orders likely to be lots of little orders of sort of 1 to 5 tests, or 6 to 20 tests, or are there going to be a smaller number of tests or orders in the sort of 100+ range from bigger sort of hospital groups and pharma companies? How do you see the sort of the profile of tests panning out?
Yeah, I think we've got to make sure we separate the two or three buckets here. So let's talk about what those buckets are. There's the individual oncologists in an oncology group, which is usually on average about 5 oncologists that see patients on a daily basis. And those are in the sort of clinics that you're used to going to. There are groups of oncologists in hospital settings where there are multiple hospitals within a health system. And then, of course, there's the pharma. So let's start with the pharma, because that's sort of where we ended up. In the pharma contracts and usage, if you will, and utilization is actually very important because it builds our dossier going forward. In those situations, there's really 2 types of usage that they have. One is to take samples that they have from patients that are in their clinical trials. These are day 0 samples, and run the CERT test on them so that they understand if that patient is a likely responder or not responder, and then correlate that data with everything they already know and have put together going forward while that clinical development, that clinical trial is occurring. Those sorts of contracts are hundreds of samples. We're looking at 500 to 1,000 samples per contract for those. That's why we're calling them high volume. The other way that the pharma is using this is in the building of biomarkers. They're comparing their approaches in translational medicine. That's the package that happens right before they go into the clinic to start looking at patients, and getting all their ducks in a row for what is it that we have in this package that will give us information proactively as we go forward. And again, those are things that can be hundreds of samples. So that's the pharma side of it. The contracts can tell you right now that we're looking at with big pharma right now off the MSA are the CERT test on samples that already exist to give them that corresponding data as they're driving through their clinical development. Now, if we go back to the first group, the oncologists, what we expect to see there are single tests being ordered 1 at a time, but aggregating to maybe there's been 3 ordered by that physician this week, and 4 the next week, and maybe 2 the next, etc. And one of their colleagues has done 1, and then building it up. And the experience that I had with that when we were at Oncoplex was that there hits a tipping point when, and this is why we're going after 50 groups. So think about this. If we're successful in getting 1 doctor per group of the 50 to get 1 test ordered every month, so once in every 4 weeks, that's 50 tests a month, right? If we have that doctor, he or she, ordering once a week, now we're at 200 tests. If we have 2 doctors in, say, 20 of those groups start to come on, and you can see how the number goes. And that's the game for selling that we're in right now, is getting that to happen. And that's with the early adopter type oncologist. Now, that's important, yes, for growing sales, for revenue generation, and we are trying to build a revenue engine around the CERT test this year for the company. Because once you have a revenue engine going, you really have got a company that's capable of doing many, many things. But the other thing about getting that sort of foundation and momentum going is that others will look at that. The other 5,750 oncologists that are treating patients daily will look at that and say, wow, there's 50 oncologists ordering, and they've ordered hundreds of tests now, and there's no red flags. I'm going to, and here's the key, they're not going to order the test. They're going to talk to one of those physicians. That's the peer-to-peer. And now what happens is we're not selling the test. The physician who's been using the test that we sold it to initially is now giving the thumbs up to the other doctor. And that's what can compel them to sell the test, to order the test, which is then a sale for us. And then in the middle ground, or the second bucket there, the hospital group, it's a similar thing where once, and this is the way we start this, we ask the hospital groups to start doing proof of concept work with our test in one hospital. We're confident that this is a test that people will see the value of. So start using it in one hospital, get that experience, have that 1 or 5 tests, and they come in individually, but you aggregate them week by week, month by month, right? And when they've had that good positive experience that's given them value for their patient, to then start to distribute it out and move it through their other hospital groups. So I hope that helps with what it looks like.
John, that's been some great granularity, so thank you for that. We've now actually had a number of questions. We had some ahead of time. We've had 3 or 4 that have come in during the webinar itself. And I'm going to group them together because I think the questions really are about, could you give us some commentary on the financial position of the company? You know, whilst improving sales are very encouraging, are additional sales going to be sufficient for the financial health of the company? So I wondered if you could just comment on those financial questions and the strength of the company at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So just to clarify, you know, we have 4.6 million pounds cash in the bank, and we have no debt, and we have no banking covenants. As you've seen, we've signed our first MSA relating to the cert with Big Pharma. We know those contracts are on the horizon, and you've seen the orders that we're starting to get from clinicians, and I believe that those will continue to grow and that we're in the right place with that. So we are expecting significantly higher revenues to come in for the company between now and the end of the calendar year. And I really don't think we have a short-term requirement for external funding, but we will have to, as a company, keep looking and seeing where is our cash position today, how does that allow us to grow, and how are those revenues actually shaping up? So I think that's the outlook right now.
Okay, thank you for that, John. The other question, we've had a couple of questions clearly from some loyal shareholders who've been with the company for, you know, a period of time, who's sort of asking, can you comment about the share price performance and whether there are any significant sellers out there currently?
Do you want me to answer that, John?
Yeah, I'll pass it to you in a second, Matthew, but I think it's actually a bad idea for a CEO to talk about a share price. But I will say this before I pass it to Matthew. The whole sector, the whole economy is just being crushed right now, and biotech particularly. So I'll leave it at that. And Matthew, who's, you know, ear to the ground in the street, maybe can give you a little more.
Yeah, as John said, you know, we're facing a double bear market in the UK, not only the biotech sector, but also smaller companies per se. In our particular situation, if you followed the RNSs, it was quite clear that Armistice, who put money into the company, actually sold shares. And I can say it did put pressure on the share price. They had no contact with us. They actually are down to 0 shares now. But of course, it created an uncertainty in the share price, which meant another institution followed on. This is all historic now. I can say 3 weeks ago, this was all cleared up. Now, the question people are going to ask is, why did Armistice do that? I think it's because they subscribed to shares at a time when the market was turning in biotech. They, regardless of the share price, thought, well, we've got our warrants and we can get those warrants for free. They're not quite for free because they've taken losses on the shares they subscribed for. And unfortunately for us, they didn't actually converse with us. So we couldn't actually bid for them and do a clear out trade. And it has created this downward movement in the share price. At the moment, as I say, as of 3 weeks ago, it's very, very neutral. There's no big institutional sellers. We do keep a close eye on the register, for various reasons, whether people are accumulating positions, stakes in the company. And as I say, at the moment, it's total neutral. We to counter Armistice and the other big institution, we're constantly, and Alex, we have to thank you for this as well, introducing us to new shareholders, but we are constantly having meetings with interested parties. And we've had counting three or four new substantial shareholders on our books who are taking a different view on the company. So that's where we are now.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've got time for a couple more, so we'll go back to a couple of operational questions. What capacity do you have for tests each month, for example, in the existing OBD labs?
So we, as you know, partner with Next Molecular here in the US. They have labs both in Rockville, which is very close. It's about a mile from where our corporate headquarters in Gaithersburg are in the US. And they also have a high throughput lab down in Richmond, Virginia, which is about 2 hours drive away. They have a capacity for us of up to 10,000 tests a month. So we have a lot to expand to. And I will say, that's not an arbitrary number. In the global diagnostics world, if you're running 10,000 tests a year, that's considered you've made it and you're a big deal. So we have plenty of bandwidth as far as running tests go.
Great, thank you, John. And we've got the one last question here, which is, in this statement, you say that OBD has applied and already received approval for unique descriptor and CPT code to be published on or before the 1st of July. And then later on, you say that the team will work with US healthcare payers to establish a unique descriptor and CPT code for the test in due course. Can you clarify what you mean by those two statements?
Yeah, so I think the clarification has already been done when I went through the slide, but suffice it to say, we're continually working with the payer groups and the insurance companies and all of their stakeholders. We have been given a unique descriptor and code, which we know is official as of July 1st. It publishes on October 1st so that it can be used. And I think the nuance there, even if there's some, there may be contradiction in those two statements, which I'll have to go back and look at. But that's what's happening on the ground. So suffice it to say, there is, by October 1st, going to be a new CPT code that is just for our test, for our company, with that descriptor that can be charged against by physicians in the US.
And I'll add a quick follow-up to that, John. Do you know the pricing bracket for that code, or is that still to be determined?
Yeah, and so we know that the pricing will not be less than what was going on with the miscellaneous code, which, as we've previously said, has an average price point of around $2,500. A low, there are always ranges, Alex. So a low $1,500 and a high $3,500. And this is always the thing when you hear ranges, you know, depending on what it is that you're particularly looking for, you either go with the top of the range or the bottom of the range, very rarely the middle. But in practicality, when you charge against this code, it's up to the payer, and this is why they give a range, to determine what they'll pay you in that range. They don't have to pay you the top. They don't have to pay you the middle. They don't have to pay you the bottom. They can actually pay you less. They should pay you because there is a code and it's been ratified. Early on, you will usually see that you get the low end or below the low end. But as you build, and this is why I think it ties in nicely, the utilization, that is more and more people using it, value being more and more seen, and the dossier being built, which is why we continually every month send more information back to PLA and the payers, then the amount that they will pay against the code can ratchet up. And then there's another nuance there where we can, as we ratchet up that value in their eyes and in the eyes of the market, go back and petition to have the value of the code moved up further and further. And in fact, companies like Exact and Guardant and Caris and Foundation Medicine have actually done that. And historically, if you were to go back, let's just pick Foundation Medicine, when they first started, their code was in the similar place to where ours is now. They now have a code which is ratcheted up, where the top of the range is $7,000. Now, having said that, the average sales price that they capture, even now, even though they've been in business for a long time, even though the list price that is being charged for is $7,000, they're capturing an average sales price of around 3.5, which is still an excellent sales point, or price point, should I say, for a diagnostic test. So I hope that helps.
John, that is very helpful. Thank you very much for that. We are now towards the end of the time that we have available. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for attending. Also to remind people as they leave, please could they complete the feedback form. I know management find that very helpful. And just to advertise a future webinar coming up in a few weeks' time when we have Pharma presenting. So thank you for attending, and John and Matthew, thank you for presenting OBD so clearly. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.